For the paleontologist, geologist and Albanianist Franz Baron Nopcsa von Felso-Zilvas, his longest journey did not take him far, but it did take him a long way back, namely to a time long before the first humans inhabited the earth. The protagonist of our next story grew up in Transylvania in a castle near the small village of Hateg. At the time of Nopcsa's birth, it was part of the Kingdom of Hungary, but now lies in Romania. To be precise, it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time of Nopcsa's birth in 1877. His family belonged to an old Hungarian noble house with good relations to the imperial house in Vienna. His uncle of the same name had been the Empress's Obersthofmeister, or head of the royal household, since 1868, and ran her court. Incidentally, the Empress at that time was none other than Elizabeth of Austria-Hungary, better known as Sisi. Over the years, the young Franz Nopcsa did not remain aloof from the world of power and politics. His later attempt to become King of Albania was a hopeless adventure, but more about that later, because first he embarked on another adventure. He became a researcher. Baron Nopcsa's journey through time begins with a bone that his younger sister Ilona gives him when he is 18 years old, which she had previously unearthed near their property, Castelul Nopcsa. It turns out to be a dinosaur bone. Nopcsa is fascinated by the fossilized remains and contacts Eduard Suess, who is a professor of geology at the University of Vienna at the time. Dinosaurs have been known for a long time, and numerous examples have already been excavated. A few decades earlier, the French naturalist Georges Cuvier had proposed the idea that fossils were the remains of extinct animals, and the fossil collector Mary Anning found the first marine reptiles on the south coast of England. However, it was Richard Owen, one of the most important naturalists of the 19th century, who ultimately gave the dinosaurs their name in 1841. While only a few individual dinosaurs were known until the 1850s, this changed in the course of the bone wars between the US paleontologists Othniel Marsh and Edward Cope. By the end of the century, these two researchers alone had added well over 100 new species. In keeping with the research fever of his time, Nopcsa went to Vienna, studied geology, earned his doctorate in no time at all, and set out in search of the primeval giants. He finally finds what he is looking for in the very area where he grew up, in Transylvania. But the fossils there puzzle him. The analysis of the bones he finds there suggests that they must have been fully grown animals. However, they are much too small for the species to which they correspond. For example, there is Magyarosaurus, a sauropod first described by Nopcsa in 1915. Sauropods were plant-eating dinosaurs that walked on all fours and were characterized by an extremely long neck and tail, but their most distinctive feature was certainly their gigantic size. The largest real-mounted dinosaur skeleton in the world, the Giraffatitan brancae, can be found in the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin. The bones, which weigh several tons, were shipped to Berlin in the early 20th century as part of an expedition to Mount Tenda Guru in East Africa during the German colonial era in the region between 1885 and 1918. Giraffatitan brancae, named after the then director of the museum, Wilhelm von Branca, is also a sauropod. It measured 13.27 meters in height, had a total length of up to 26 meters, and probably weighed an incredible 50 tons when alive. These dimensions give us an idea of how the peace-loving herbivorous sauropods deterred their enemies, namely by their enormous size. But not so the sauropods that Nopcsa has in front of him. The Magyarosaurus, for example, was comparatively tiny, at 2 meters high and 6 meters long. In western Romania, the Baron comes across numerous remains of such a dwarf dinosaurs. These include, for example, the Telmatosaurus transylvanicus, a bird-necked dinosaur, Ornithischia, which Nopcsa first describes in 1900. But why are the dinosaurs in Transylvania smaller than their relatives in other parts of the world? Nopcsa provided an explanation for this phenomenon that still convinces researchers today. He was also one of the first researchers to apply the findings of evolutionary biology to fossils, because he was not satisfied with simply collecting and assembling bones. He was much more interested in the circumstances and physiology of the deceased animals. He looked at fossils as if they were living creatures. So Nopcsa is now looking at the former habitat of these undersized giant lizards. Until about 66 million years ago, during the late Cretaceous towards the end of the Mesozoic era, the area around Haiteg was an offshore island in the Tethys Ocean. Many millions of years before, when the dinosaurs began to conquer the Earth, practically the whole world was still open to them. The entire mainland was united in the supercontinent Pangaea. But over the course of millions of years, the continent broke into two parts, Laurasia and Gondwana. And in between, the aforementioned Tethys, a vast ocean in the east of Pangaea. Nopcsa was certainly not unfamiliar with this knowledge, as the discovery of Gondwana and Tethys goes back to his mentor, Edward Suess. In any case, during the late Cretaceous, an island with a subtropical climate emerged in the area of present-day Transylvania. Nopcsa now theorized that the animals found there must have been an example of island dwarfism. The isolated location would have caused the dinosaurs at Haiteg to become smaller and smaller from generation to generation. This is a phenomenon that is frequently observed on islands, as first noted by paleontologist Dorothea Bate in 1907. One possible reason for the phenomenon is thought to be that islands have fewer resources, fewer predators, and fewer species per unit area, giving smaller individuals an advantage. However, researchers have observed another phenomenon in addition to dwarfism: gigantism. Some animals, usually smaller ones, become much larger on islands than their mainland relatives. The Canadian biologist Bristol Foster has therefore put forward a hypothesis known as the island rule or Foster's rule. In short, large animals tend to become smaller on islands. They become dwarfed. Small animals tend to become larger. One example of this is the Galapagos giant tortoise. It is one of many observations that Nopcsa discusses in the course of his research career, not all of which are later confirmed. Although he never aspires to an academic position, he publishes over 180 articles. In total, he identifies 25 different species of reptiles from the Mesozoic era, including some dinosaurs. Despite his impressive observations, the Baron does not come off well in many of his contemporaries' descriptions. He is described as quarrelsome and arrogant, albeit endowed with an extraordinary curiosity. Nopcsa is therefore extremely productive, but not interested in an academic career. Rather, he longs for adventure. And so it comes about that the extinct reptiles soon fade from his mind. He now devotes his full passion to a different subject. For many years, Nopcsa travels in the present, through a region of Europe that is little known in the Habsburg monarchy at the time. For centuries, it was a province of the Ottoman Empire, but its rule was not to last much longer, which essentially to this day created an enormous potential for conflict into which Nopcsa was also drawn. The Ottomans had ruled there since the end of the 15th century, but as in many European countries, a national movement emerged in Albania in the 19th century. The regions in northern Albania in particular are so inaccessible that they are almost impossible to control. It is precisely this area that interests the adventurer Nopcsa, and he is actually one of the first to go there as a researcher. The description of the adventures he experiences in the Balkans reads a little like a Karl May novel, complete with shepherd costumes, abduction and espionage. We don't know whether all of this really happened, or if some of it wasn't just part of his grandstanding. Initially, however, Nopcsa was there as a geologist and ethnographer. Fascinated by the customs, languages and religions of the people in this region, he spent several years there from 1903 onwards, living for a time in the city of Shkodra, the cultural centre of northern Albania. From 1906, he was no longer alone, but was accompanied by the Albanian Bagazid Elmaz Doda, whom he met in Bucharest and employed as his secretary. It is an open secret that the two are lovers, and Nopcsa makes no effort to hide his homosexuality. As a rich, independent nobleman with contacts in the highest political circles, he has no fear of discrimination or prosecution. The Baron of Adventure quickly learnt the language, became a leading expert, one of the first Albanian scholars, and published a geological map of northern Albania, followed by a monograph of more than 600 pages on the geography and geology of northern Albania. Photographs from this period show him dressed in traditional Albanian clothing. His trips to Albania were partly financed by his uncle, who was already mentioned and who was in the service of Elizabeth of Austria-Hungary. This was no coincidence, because what began as a harmless research trip for Nopcsa developed over the years into a political intrigue. The Habsburgs were trying to exploit the weakness of the Ottoman Empire to expand their sphere of influence in the Balkans. This conflict reached a first climax in 1908, when Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina. Nopcsa now tried to influence the national movement in the Balkan state and advocated the independence of Albania. For example, he tried to instigate a guerrilla war against the Ottomans in the north of the country, but this failed due to a lack of support from the Habsburg military leadership. Serbia hoped that this would give it access to the Mediterranean, something that Austria-Hungary was determined to prevent at all costs. Albania is to remain an independent state. Therefore, the major European powers are seeking a solution together and, after the 1913 London Conference of Ambassadors, proposed to occupy the throne of Albania with one of their princes. And who would be better suited than an Albania expert of noble origin? In any case, Nopcsa cautiously brings himself into play, but is not seriously considered by the decision-makers and is not supported by the political leadership of Perhaps this is also because he makes some abstruse proposals, such as that of procuring funds as a ruling prince by marrying a rich American woman aspiring to a princely title, which would otherwise be decidedly distasteful to me. In the end, he can count himself lucky, because the German prince and officer, Prince Wilhelm Friedrich Heinrich Prince zu Wied, does ascend the throne in 1914, but withdraws from it just 6 months later, shortly after the start of the First World War. Meanwhile, Nopcsa was now active as an officer in the Austro-Hungarian army in the Balkans, including as a spy who regularly sent secret messages to Vienna disguised as love letters. When he learned that Montenegro had put a price on his head, he lived as an Albanian among Albanians until the order arrived from Vienna for him to return. The war changed everything for Nopcsa because the Habsburg monarchy broke up into many small nation-states and Transylvania became part of Romania. As a result, the Baron lost his titles, his fortune and his estates. In 1925, he was offered the post of director of the Hungarian Geological Institute in Budapest to secure his financial future, but he resigned after 3 years. He couldn't sit at a desk for long. Instead, he sold his dinosaur bones to the Natural History Museum in London, where they are still kept today, and used the money to finance a motorbike trip across Europe. With his beloved Doda in the sidecar, the route took him across the Alps to Italy, in search of fossils, among other places. Nopcsa never returned to Albania. He devoted himself to his numerous notes and publications, but his health continued to deteriorate in the period after the First World War. In his farewell letter, he himself wrote of a shattered nervous system. On top of that, he was chronically broke. His housekeeper reported that she had not been paid in 4 months. Nopcsa's extensive library was about to be sold, but the Friedrich Wilhelms Universität in Berlin, now Humboldt University, was stalling him with an offer. In the end, however, the library was not sold. On 25th of April 1933, at the age of just under 56, Nopcsa's journey ended with murder and subsequent suicide in Vienna's First District. Doda had no idea of the fateful decision that Nopcsa had already made for him and himself. Doda administered sleeping powder to his secretary and companion and then shot him and then